Millions of people go through painful childhoods, yet many of them fight to find light along the way, doing everything they can to give their children a better life, one that doesn't repeat the mistakes of the past. But not everyone chooses that path. Some who have endured pain turn around and inflict unthinkable suffering on others, even on their own innocent children. This isn't just a story about how trauma can shape people. It's a story about choices and about someone who made the worst possible ones, even when other options were there. This is the shocking case where a daughter killed her own mother, skinned and burned her remains, and murdered a 3-year-old child in the process. This is the story of Yanti Rustini and Kaya, the Cianjur murder case. On May 5th, 2025, a man's scream pierced the morning air in Kampung Cikadongdong in the village of Cibanteng, Sukaresmi district, Cianjur, Indonesia. The terrified cry startled everyone within earshot, and all eyes turned toward where he stood, pointing among the bushes. "Bones," he gasped. "I found human bones." News spread through the village like wildfire. People came running, women shielding their children's eyes, everyone too horrified, yet too curious to look away. And these weren't the clean and white bones you'd see in a classroom skeleton. They were blackened, as if flesh had rotted while still attached, slowly decomposing in the open air. The putrid smell drew flies and other insects, making the air thick and nauseating. Someone pulled out their phone, recorded the grisly discovery, and immediately sent the footage to police. That same day, another scream echoed through the village. This time, it came from a man throwing trash into the river. Among the floating plastic waste, he spotted something that looked like a blackened tube with bones attached. Upon hearing about the first discovery, he too contacted the police. When officers arrived at both scenes, they were horrified by what they found. Human remains scattered across different locations, a skull, jawbone, legs, and hands, all blackened from burning. The villagers had gathered the pieces, trying to make sense of the horrific puzzle. Police launched an immediate investigation, questioning everyone who had been present when the remains were discovered. And what they learned was disturbing. These bones belonged to at least one person who had been dead for several days before being found. Yet nobody had witnessed anyone disposing of human remains. With no clear leads, investigators asked a crucial question: who has gone missing recently? The villagers looked at each other uncertainly. No missing person reports had been filed. No one had disappeared that they knew of. Then one woman hesitantly raised her hand. "There's someone we haven't seen in weeks," she said. "Lily's. She's 51 years old, and she used to be very social, always active with community activities. She was well regarded for her involvement in village activities and was usually the first person you'd see at any community gathering. But lately, no one's seen her around." Police asked to be led to Lily's home. When they arrived, no one answered their calls. The door was locked and the house seemed empty. But there was something wrong, a terrible, overwhelming stench of rotting flesh emanating from inside. The villagemen forced the door open, and immediately everyone covered their noses. The smell was unbearable. Although the house had seemed empty, one of the investigators caught movement in the shadows. Someone was inside. They found 2 people hiding in the house, a 31-year-old woman named Yanti Rustini and her 60-year-old father, Kaya. Both were immediately taken in for questioning. Initially, both Yanti and Kaya denied any involvement in the deaths. They claimed to be as shocked and confused as everyone else. However, as a precautionary measure, investigators confiscated their phones and began examining the data stored inside. And what they found made even hardened police officers sick. Stored in Yanti's phone were photographs dated April 22nd, 2025. The images showed a woman, clearly Lilith, lying dead, her head blackened and grotesquely disfigured. But the horror didn't end there. There was also a photograph of a 3-year-old child, Siti Nurhayati, Yanti's own daughter, in the same horrific state. The photographic evidence was undeniable. Yanti had documented her own crimes. To understand what exactly led to the murders, we must examine Yanti's background. Born Yanti Rustini to Lilith and Kaya in rural Tianjur, she grew up knowing that opportunities were limited for someone from her background. Her family wasn't wealthy. They lived simply, with both parents working to make ends meet. As the eldest of 3 children, Yanti studied hard, hoping to break free from the constraints of rural poverty and create a better life for herself. But opportunities never came. She ended up married, though details about her husband remain unknown, and living in her parents' house with her 3-year-old daughter, Siti Nurhayati, still searching for a chance to build the life she dreamed of. What made Yanti's situation particularly painful was the stark favoritism her mother showed. Lilith was closer to Yanti's 2 younger siblings, whose names and current whereabouts remain undisclosed, likely to protect their privacy. As the eldest, Yanti felt excluded from her family's affections, watching her mother lavish attention on her siblings while treating her as an outsider in her own home. The psychological abuse Yanti endured was real and damaging. Lilith isolated her daughter from peers and constantly criticized her. What Lilith called teasing was actually a steady stream of cruel comments about Yanti's appearance and social awkwardness. Lilith would compare Yanti's appearance unfavorably to others, calling other people more presentable. She pressured Yanti relentlessly about everything: her studies, her love life, even how she raised her own daughter. Ironically, Lilith seemed to pay more attention to her granddaughter, Siti Nurhayati, than to Yanti herself, continuing the pattern of emotional neglect that had defined their relationship. Making matters worse, Lilith controlled family finances tightly. When Kaya asked to borrow money to pay his mounting debts, Lilith refused. This refusal would become one of the final triggers that pushed both father and daughter toward their deadly plan. Years of anger and disappointment may have built up inside Yanti, but the moment she decided to kill her mother, and especially when she murdered her own innocent child, she crossed a line that no amount of past suffering can justify. At first, Yanti planned to commit the crime alone, but as she thought more about the logistics, she realized she would need help disposing of the body. And that is when she turned to her father, Kaya. Kaya's background remains largely unknown, but the police reports reveal a man drowning in financial desperation. He owed 90 million rupiah to various creditors, including dangerous loan sharks. Despite working, none of his money ever seemed to make it home to his family. Where it went remains a mystery. The mounting interest on his debts was crushing him, and he was running out of options. When Yanti approached her father about helping her kill her mother, he initially refused, terrified of getting caught and facing legal consequences. But Yanti knew exactly what to say to change his mind. "You can take her jewelry." And she was referring to Lilith's gold necklace and bracelet, weighing 63 grams, worth enough to cover Kaya's entire debt. The same jewelry that Lilith had refused to let him borrow against, claiming it was being held in trust for her other children working abroad. And that single sentence sealed the deal. Greed overcame whatever paternal instincts or moral reservations Kaya might have had. The murder took place on the night of April 21st, 2025, though some sources indicate they may have occurred on April 22nd. Father and daughter prepared for their gruesome task, gathering sharp instruments, knives, and scissors just in case they needed them. And that evening, Yanti performed one final act of motherhood. She tucked her 3-year-old daughter, Siti Nurhayati, into bed, singing her a lullaby and holding her close until the little girl's breathing became deep and steady with sleep. Only then did Yanti creep out of the room and move toward her mother's bedroom, where Kaya was waiting. Kaya positioned himself at the head of the bed, holding down Lilis's arm while Yanti climbed on top of her sleeping mother. Yanti wrapped her hands around her mother's throat and began to strangle her. The attack woke Lilis, who fought desperately for her life. She struggled against her husband and daughter, pleading for mercy, gasping for air. But Kaya restrained her arms. Lilis's struggles were futile. Yanti continued choking her own mother, ignoring the woman's desperate pleas, until finally, Lilis's eyes closed and her body went still. As soon as Lilis died, Kaya immediately began stripping the jewelry from her body. He ransacked her wardrobe, taking all her money and gold. For a moment, he smiled. His debts could finally be paid. But when Kaya looked at Yanti, he saw not relief or satisfaction on her face, but fear. "What if Siti wakes up and cries?" Yanti whispered. "Her crying will wake the whole village." That thought triggered something dark in Yanti's mind. Without hesitation, she rushed to her sleeping daughter's room and murdered the 3-year-old child in exactly the same way she had killed her mother, by strangulation. The 2 bodies were left in the house for 4 days, slowly decomposing in the tropical heat. The smell became increasingly unbearable, forcing Yanti and Kaya to act quickly to dispose of the evidence. Their first step was mutilation. They cut up both bodies into smaller pieces: hands, arms, legs, heads, and internal organs. But even in pieces, the body parts were still recognizably human. If found, they could easily be identified. So they took their gruesome work a step further. They skinned every piece, stripping away flesh and skin until only bloody muscle and bone remained. They worked methodically, making sure to do a thorough job. After cleaning up the pools of blood from their house, though their rushed job left many spots with blood and flesh fragments, creating the terrible smell that would later alert neighbors, they realized that simply dumping the skin remains would create problems too. The rotting flesh would smell and draw attention. So their solution was to burn everything. They constructed a makeshift crematorium and burned the mutilated body parts. The smell of burning flesh no longer bothered them. Their only focus was eliminating all traces of their crime. Once the burning was complete, they collected the larger bones and scattered them across different locations throughout the village, some in bushes, others in the river, trying to make the remains as difficult to connect as possible. Despite all their efforts to hide the evidence, Yanti made one crucial error that would ultimately lead to their capture. Perhaps driven by the same twisted psychology that had motivated the murders in the first place, her pent-up rage toward her mother, Yanti chose to document almost everything. She photographed her mother's lifeless body after the strangulation, capturing the bulging eyes and blue-tinged skin that showed death by asphyxiation. She took pictures of the burned remains, including her mother's charred head, arms, and legs. She even photographed her own daughter's corpse. In the days following the murders, Yanti and Kaya rarely left their house. The only time Kaya ventured out was to sell Lilis's jewelry and pay off his debts. Now debt-free, both remained holed up in their home, surrounded by the lingering stench of death and decay. The pair thought they had committed the perfect crime. They had disposed of the bodies, cleaned up the evidence, and eliminated all witnesses. What they hadn't counted on was the human factor, neighbors wondering why the normally social and chatty Lilis had suddenly vanished. When villagers asked Yanti and Kaya about Lilis's whereabouts, their answer was always the same: "We don't know where she went." Days passed. Just when the father-daughter pair thought they had escaped detection, they heard a loud knock at their door. It was the police, accompanied by several villagers. Before Yanti and Kaya could react, the group forced their way into the house and arrested them both. When first questioned about Lilith's disappearance, both suspects denied any involvement, claiming she had simply vanished without their knowledge. But their lies fell apart the moment investigators examined Yanti's phone. The gallery was filled not with family photos or happy memories, but with images of death. The horrifying evidence made some investigators curse the perpetrators in anger. Others vomited from disgust. Some walked away, unable to look at either Yanti or Kaya, afraid they might become victims of the pair's apparent brutality. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Yanti knew she needed a defense strategy. In Indonesia, Article 44 of the Criminal Code provides that individuals diagnosed with certain mental health disorders can be excused from criminal responsibility, but only if the mental condition affects their ability to distinguish right from wrong. And knowing this legal loophole, when asked why she had killed her mother and daughter, Yanti claimed the Genderuwo told me to do it. A Genderuwo is a forest spirit from Indonesian folklore, usually described as a large, hairy creature that shapeshifts to seduce unmarried women or wives whose husbands are away. Anyone familiar with the mythology would immediately recognize that Yanti's claim made no sense. Genderuwo spirits have never been associated with commanding people to commit murder. Under pressure in the interrogation room, with investigators challenging her transparently false claim and mounting evidence against her, Yanti finally abandoned her legal strategy. The psychological examination had already determined that she was mentally competent and fully responsible for her actions. With knives, scissors, jewelry, and her phone full of incriminating photos as evidence, Yanti finally broke down and confessed. Yes, I did it. The puzzle pieces finally came together as Yanti revealed the full story. Years of psychological pressure, lack of attention, and the feeling that her mother had never truly loved her had driven Yanti to the breaking point. Her hatred had festered until it erupted in the horrific murder of Lilith, strangling her, dismembering her body, skinning the pieces, and burning the remains. As for little Siti Nurhayati, she was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. The reason Yanti and Kaya killed the 3-year-old was purely practical. They were afraid she would wake up and alert the neighbors to the murder. The life of an innocent child ended at the hands of her own mother and grandfather, all in the name of revenge and greed. The case is still proceeding through Indonesia's legal system with limited media coverage. And based on the charges filed, both defendants face possible punishment under laws regarding child protection and premeditated murder. The maximum punishment for these charges is either the death sentence or life imprisonment, plus an additional 20 years in prison. And there has been relatively little media coverage of this devastating case, either domestically in Indonesia or internationally. However, the case highlights critical lessons about family dynamics and personal responsibility. We cannot deny that childhood experiences shape us, but they do not determine our choices. Increasingly, people are shifting away from harsh, authoritarian parenting toward more supportive approaches that provide children with validation and teach them skills their parents never learned. And this is crucial for preventing cycles of abuse. But we must also emphasize personal accountability. Yanti had choices every step of the way. She could have sought help for her mental health. She could have moved out with her daughter. She could have confronted her mother directly or just simply cut contact. She could have protected her innocent child instead of killing her. The most tragic victim in this case is 3-year-old Siti Nurhayati, who had no choice in any of this. She was murdered simply for being in the wrong place at the wrong time, killed by the very person who should have protected her above all else. So what do you think about this case? Do you think Yanti and Kaya deserve life imprisonment or even the death penalty for their calculated brutal murders? How can we, as a society, better identify and help children who are suffering emotional abuse, while also teaching them that no matter what they've experienced, violence is never the answer. This case forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about personal responsibility and the importance of breaking cycles of trauma before they cause harm to others. Perhaps the most chilling aspect is how a family that appeared normal from outside, with Lilith being a respected, active community member, could harbor such deep dysfunction. It reminds us that behind closed doors, even in families that seem stable to their neighbors, devastating emotional abuse can occur. However, what this case ultimately teaches us is that no amount of past suffering justifies taking innocent lives. Every day, countless people overcome terrible childhoods to become loving, productive members of society. Yanti and Kaya chose a different path, one of selfishness, cruelty, and murder. That choice, and that choice alone, defines who they really are. That is all for today. Thanks for watching.